This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
The Giants came into Wrigley 5 games behind the Dodgers in the West. Willie Mays was gone. In fact, he was idling away his waning days with the Mets. But the Giants still had Willie McCovey and Bobby Bonds, and their record was slightly better than the Cubs on July 14th. Their starter was Ray Hiller, a left-hander with 6 wins and 7 losses. There were at least 41,000 rowdy Cubs fans packed into Wrigley at 2 p.m. Countless others watched from the rooftops beyond the left field wall. When Joe Castle's name was called in the bottom of the first, a deafening ovation shook the old place and buried the voices of Curt Gowdy and Tony Kubek. Hiller was a junk dealer whose fastball rarely topped 80. He lobbed up a couple of harmless curveballs, and Joe resisted the urge to flail away. His third pitch was some knuckle-curve combo that fluttered high and outside, and with the count 3-0, Joe got the signal to hit away. Hiller came in with a slider that didn't move much, and Joe swung with a vengeance. The ball lifted high and lazy at first, then it seemed to gain speed. Soon there was no doubt it was gone. The question was, where would it land? Gary Matthews, the left fielder, took 2 steps back, then stopped, turned around, put his hands on his hips, and watched to see where it was going. The ball eventually bounced off the 5th-floor facade of a building some 470 feet from home plate. Perhaps he was fatigued from all the home run trots, or maybe he was learning to savor the moment. But whatever the reason, Joe rounded the bases at a slower pace, but not slow enough to aggravate the pitcher. Never show up the pitcher, Red and Charlie had drilled into him since the age of 10. Wrigley Field had never been louder. The standing ovation roared until Joe took a step out of the dugout, tipped his cap, and acknowledged the adoring crowd. Then he blew a kiss at his mother, who was in the owner's seats in the second row. 10 for 10, with 6 home runs. Joe led off in the bottom of the third with the score tied 1-1. On the first pitch, he faked a bunt, and the entire Giant infield reacted in spasms. Ed Goodson at third and Chris Spire at short were on their heels before the pitch, expecting a line shot from an astonishingly quick bat. They eventually shot forward. Tito Fuentes did the same, while McCovey stutter-stepped around first base. After Hiller recovered from the pitch, he bolted upright, as if terrified of a bunt. Evidently, the Giant scouts had been alerted to Joe's bunting skills. Ball 1. Hiller kept his fastball off the center of the plate, opting instead to pick at the corners and hope for the best. His second pitch was a fastball, 5 inches outside. Joe waited and waited, then went with the pitch and slapped it to right field for a single. 11 for 11. It may have been the thrill of watching history in the making, or it could have been the clearing skies and sunshine and cold beer, or perhaps even the excitement that a full house always provided. Or probably all of the above, but the atmosphere at Wrigley was electric. By now, Joe was receiving a standing ovation when he stepped into the on-deck circle, another when he stepped to the plate, and of course an even rowdier one with each hit. He tipped his cap and helmet to the crowd, then took a lead off first. His 12th at-bat came in the bottom of the 6th, with the Cubs up 3-2. When the 41,000 faithful stood to applaud, they remained standing. On television, Curt Gowdy admitted to having a knot in his stomach. On the radio, Vince Lloyd described it as the most dramatic moment he could remember. Lou Boudreau went silent. Hiller had abandoned his fastball altogether and was surviving on long, looping curves, change-ups, and a nasty combo of a slider and curve known as a slurve. Joe fouled off the first 2 pitches, both balls, and cursed himself for swinging at bad pitches. He shortened his stance, choked up, and took a ball high. The 4th pitch was a slow, dropping curve, a pitch that might cross the plate at the knees or 6 inches lower, and Joe took no chances. He chopped down on the pitch, and it slammed hard into home plate. A fair ball. It ricocheted high into the air toward third, where Goodson charged and waited. And waited. When he finally caught the ball, Joe was past first base for his 12th consecutive hit. Move over, Moose Dropo. Again he tipped his hat to the screaming crowd. Willie McCovey, a fierce competitor, tapped him on the rear with his glove, and said, "Congratulations, kid." Joe could only smile and nod. He was dreaming, and in another world. Not too many years earlier, his baseball card collection included a double all-star selection featuring both Willie McCovey and Willie Mays. In the top of the eighth, McCovey hit a two-run bomb that sailed over the right field bleachers and was probably never found. The Giants led 5-3 when the Cubs came to bat in the bottom of the inning. The score was one thing, but the majority of the fans were not there just to watch a ball game. It was a rare moment to celebrate. Their beloved Cubs had not won a World Series since 1908. There had been some memorable moments. The 1945 team lost the series in 7 games to Detroit, though this had been during the war years, when the good players were serving in the armed forces. There had been a few Hall of Famers, Hack Wilson in the 1920s and Ernie Banks in the 1950s and 60s. Generally speaking, though, Cubs fans were accustomed to disappointment. They were fiercely loyal, but also desperate for a team or a player that was better than the rest. Joe's 13th at-bat had enough pressure because of the first 12 hits, but add a runner at each base, 2 outs, and 2 runs down, and the tension on the field was suffocating. The crowd was standing, yelling, some were even praying. Hiller was gone, replaced by a right-hander named Bobby Lund, a veteran reliever who threw exceptionally hard. Joe would later admit that he preferred to hit from the left side because he could pick up the fastballs a bit quicker. He was always content to foul off pitches and work the count full, but in this, his 13th and possibly most important at-bat in whatever career he might eventually have, he decided to be impatient. He took the first pitch, a high fastball, and after one look at Lund's delivery, he was ready. The second pitch was another fastball, maybe an inch outside, but close enough to rip. Joe hit a scorcher to right center, a bullet that Tito Fuentes at second actually leaped for and missed badly. The ball stayed 10 feet off the ground until it crashed into the ivy, where Bobby Bonds played it on one hop and fired home. With 2 outs, the runners were off with contact, and Joe's double cleared the bases. When he slid unchallenged into second base, he owned the record, the one that had been labeled unbreakable. Standing on second, he put his hands on his knees and stared at the dirt, and for a few seconds tried to believe and savor the moment. The stadium was manic. The noise was ear-splitting. The Giants' catcher, Dave Rader, had the ball, and when the dust settled, called time. Slowly, he walked past the mound to second base, where he ceremoniously handed it to Joe Castle. The crowd roared even louder with this memorable act of sportsmanship. Joe removed his helmet and acknowledged the adulation. The umpires were in no hurry to resume play. They were witnessing history, and the game was played without a clock. Finally, Joe walked to the seats beside the Cubs' dugout and tossed the ball to his father. Then he went back to second base and put on his helmet. He looked deep into center field and quickly wiped a tear from his cheek. A camera caught it, and Kurt Gowdy and Tony Kubek made sure the world saw that Joe Castle, standing alone on second base and alone in the record book, now a legend, was human enough to show emotion.